Hey, tonight we're going to talk about what it was like to be a fighter pilot in World War II. You think your day was rough? Let me tell you about flying a wooden airplane into enemy territory at 50 feet, dodging German fighters while trying not to crash into a French farmhouse. Spoiler, it wasn't great for your nerves. Hey, if you're enjoying these bedtime stories about weird history, I'd really appreciate a like or subscribe. I'm curious where you're listening from. Drop a comment with your location and what time it is there. Is it actually bedtime? I know, you're trying to fall asleep and I'm about to tell you about flying through searchlights and flak, but trust me, it gets better. Now, find a cozy spot. Take a slow, deep breath and let your body sink into comfort as we journey back in time together. Congratulations, you've just woken up in a freezing cold barracks in England, 1943. The good news? You're alive and you're about to become one of the most feared pilots in the sky. The bad news? Your stomach is already cramping from hunger, your feet are numb from the cold, and you're about to spend the next year flying a plywood airplane into the heart of German-occupied Europe. You roll over on the thin mattress, feeling the rough wool blankets scratch against your skin. The barracks around you smell like unwashed bodies, stale cigarettes, and that peculiar damp smell that seems to follow you everywhere in wartime Britain. Through the small window, you can see the grey dawn breaking over the airfield, and already you hear the distant rumble of engines warming up. Your flight boots sit beside your bunk, leather stiff with cold and age. When you slip your feet into them, the leather feels like ice against your skin. The mess hall serves you something that might generously be called breakfast. The porridge tastes like paste mixed with sawdust, and the tea could strip paint from a wall. But you're 22 years old, and like most of the pilots around you, you're grateful for whatever you can get. You look around at the other faces in the mess, young men trying to look confident while spooning down grey slop. Some of them won't be here next month. Statistics don't lie, and the statistics for fighter pilots in 1943 are not encouraging. You've been selected to fly the Mosquito, and that makes you either very lucky or very unlucky, depending on how you look at it. The de Havilland Mosquito is made almost entirely of wood, which sounds insane until you realise it's also one of the fastest aircraft in the world. The other pilots call it the Wooden Wonder, or just Mossy, and they say it with a mixture of affection and respect that borders on reverence. When fully loaded, this airplane can outrun most German fighters, which is good because it has to. There's no armour plating, no defensive guns pointing backward. Your only defence is speed and the skill to use it. Walking out to your aircraft in the morning mist, you can smell the familiar mixture of aviation fuel, engine oil, and damp earth. The Mosquito sits on the tarmac like a sleek wooden sculpture, its twin Merlin engines gleaming under the weak British sun. It's 40 feet long with a 54-foot wingspan, and it weighs just over 14,000 pounds when empty. Those numbers mean everything and nothing until you're actually sitting in the cockpit, feeling the airplane respond to your every movement like a living thing. The cockpit is cramped. You and your navigator sit side by side so close that you can smell what he had for breakfast and feel him tense up when things get dangerous. The instrument panel stretches in front of you, a bewildering array of dials, switches and gauges that you've memorized until you can find any of them in complete darkness. Because you'll need to. Many of your missions will be at night, flying so low that you can count the chimney pots on French farmhouses. When you strap yourself in, the harness cuts into your shoulders and chest. The seat is hard, barely padded, and within an hour of flying it will feel like sitting on concrete. But right now, as you run through your pre-flight checks, everything feels sharp and immediate. Your hands move over the controls with practiced efficiency, checking fuel flow, engine temperatures, oxygen supply. The radio crackles to life in your headphones, and suddenly you're connected to a network of voices that extends across all of occupied Europe. Starting the engines is a ritual that never gets old. The big Merlin engines cough, wheeze, then catch with a roar that you feel in your chest. The whole airplane vibrates around you, and for a moment you're reminded that you're sitting on top of two very powerful, very complex machines that could kill you in dozens of different ways if something goes wrong. The engine noise is so loud that even with your leather flying helmet, conversation becomes impossible except through the intercom system. Taxiing to the runway, you feel every bump and pothole through the thin tires. The Mosquito bounces and sways like a boat in choppy water, and you have to constantly adjust the rudder pedals to keep it moving in a straight line. Other pilots wave from their cockpits as you pass, and you wave back, knowing that some of these faces you'll never see again. The control tower gives you clearance for takeoff, and suddenly the moment is here. You push the throttles forward and the Merlins roar to full power. The acceleration presses you back into your seat as the Mosquito gathers speed, the airfield rushing past in a blur of green grass and concrete. At 90 miles per hour, you pull back gently on the control stick, and the airplane lifts off the ground with the grace of a bird. Flying the Mosquito is unlike anything else in the world. The controls are so responsive that the airplane seems to read your mind. Think about turning left and the aircraft banks before you've even moved the stick. The wood construction gives it a flexibility that metal airplanes lack. And in turbulence, it bends and flexes rather than fighting the air. It's almost alive under your hands. But right now, you're just learning. Your early missions are training flights over the English countryside, learning to navigate by landmarks, practicing formation flying, getting used to the peculiar challenges of flying a wooden airplane. You learn that the Mosquito doesn't like to be rushed. Try to pull too many Gs in a turn, and the wooden structure will remind you of its limits with ominous creaking sounds. Push the engines too hard for too long, and the temperatures will climb into the red zone faster than you can say engine failure. Your instructor is a veteran pilot who's already completed one tour of operations and lived to tell about it. This makes him practically ancient at the age of 25, and he treats you with the patience of a man who's seen too many young pilots make fatal mistakes. The airplane will keep you alive if you treat it right, he tells you as you practice low-level flying over the Scottish Highlands. But it's not forgiving. Make a mistake down here, and you won't have time to make another one. Low-level flying is an art form that takes months to master. You learn to read the terrain ahead, to spot power lines and radio masts before they become a problem, to use hills and valleys to hide from radar. At 50 feet above the ground at 250 miles per hour, everything happens very fast. A momentary lapse in concentration, a split-second delay in reaction time, and you'll be nothing more than a smoking crater in a farmer's field. You practice navigation using nothing but your eyes and a map. No radio beacons, no electronic aids, just the skill to pick out landmarks and dead reckon your way across hundreds of miles of hostile territory. You learn to identify German airfields from the air, to spot the telltale patterns of aircraft dispersal areas and the distinctive layout of anti-aircraft gun positions. Every piece of information might save your life someday. The navigation training is relentless. Your navigator sits beside you with his charts and instruments, calling out course corrections and keeping track of wind drift and ground speed. Together, you learn to work as a team, each anticipating what the other needs before it's asked for. In combat, this wordless communication will be the difference between life and death. As weeks turn into months, you accumulate flying hours and experience. You learn to fly in weather that would ground commercial aircraft, to navigate in clouds so thick you can't see your own wingtips, to land on airfields that are nothing more than strips of grass in the middle of nowhere. Your hands develop calluses from gripping the control stick, and your body adapts to the constant vibration and noise of the engines. The physical demands of flying are greater than you expected. The Mosquito is not a gentle airplane. The control forces are heavy, especially at high speed, and a long mission leaves your arms and shoulders aching. The noise level is constant and wearing, even with your helmet and earphones. After a 6-hour flight, your ears ring for hours afterward, and you find yourself asking people to repeat things they've said perfectly clearly. But there's also a peculiar beauty to it all, flying at dawn over the English countryside, watching the mist rise from rivers and valleys, seeing the world spread out below you like a living map. These moments of peace and beauty become more precious when you know that soon you'll be flying over landscapes where people are trying to kill you. Your training aircraft gradually accumulates the wear and tear of constant use. The wood and fabric covering shows patches and repairs, and the engines develop the quirks and personality that come with hundreds of hours of operation. You learn that the port engine runs slightly hotter than the starboard, that the radio has a tendency to crackle during turns to the left, that the landing gear makes a particular grinding noise that means everything is working properly. The other pilots in your squadron become your extended family. You share meals, jokes, fears, and the peculiar camaraderie that comes from facing death together on a regular basis. Some of them are veterans of the Battle of Britain, men who've already faced the German Air Force and lived to fight another day. Others are fresh from training, even newer than you, trying to learn the ropes without getting killed in the process. Evening briefings become routine. The intelligence officer spreads maps across the briefing room table and points out targets, weather conditions, enemy activity reports. You memorize route details, alternative landing fields, radio frequencies for emergencies. The information is vital, but it's also sobering. Every red mark on the map represents a place where someone is waiting to shoot you down. Sleep comes hard in those early days. Your mind replays every detail of the day's flying, every mistake, every near miss, every lesson learned. The barracks never truly quiet down, as someone is always returning from a mission, preparing for an early takeoff, or dealing with the aftermath of operations gone wrong. You learn to sleep through the sound of engines starting up at all hours, the tramping of boots in the corridors, the muffled conversations of men trying not to wake their squadron mates. Your body adapts to the irregular schedule of military flying. Breakfast at 4 a.m, missions at dawn, debriefing in the late morning, aircraft maintenance in the afternoon, more flying if the weather holds, meals come when they come, sleep when you can get it, and always the knowledge that tomorrow might bring something that will test every skill you've learned. The weather in Britain seems determined to make flying as difficult as possible. Rain, fog, snow and wind are constant companions. You learn to take off in conditions that would make a civilian pilot turn around and go home. Visibility measured in dozens of yards rather than miles. Crosswinds that push the airplane sideways down the runway. Ice that forms on the wings and threatens to bring you down. But gradually, almost without noticing it, you become competent. The controls feel natural in your hands. Navigation becomes second nature, and the partnership with your navigator develops into something approaching telepathy. You're ready for your first operational mission, and that's when things get really interesting. Because now they're going to send you into German-occupied Europe, where people are waiting to shoot you down with everything from fighter aircraft to farmers with shotguns. Your training is over and the real war is about to begin. Your first operational mission comes on a cold September morning in 1941. The briefing room smells like stale tobacco and nervous sweat as you study the target photographs spread across the wooden table. Tonight, you're going to attack a German airfield in occupied France. And the intelligence officer's matter-of-fact tone doesn't quite hide the fact that this is essentially a suicide mission with slightly better odds than usual. The target is here, he says, pointing to an aerial photograph that shows neat rows of aircraft parked beside concrete runways. Luftwaffe fighter base, approximately 40 miles inland from the French coast. Your job is to sneak in at low level, shoot up as many aircraft as you can find, and get out before their fighters can scramble. You nod along with the other pilots, but your stomach is doing backflips as you absorb the details. The route takes you across the English Channel at wave-top height, then inland through a maze of valleys and forests using darkness and terrain to avoid German radar. If everything goes according to plan, you'll arrive over the target just before dawn, when the German pilots are least alert and most vulnerable. The good news is that the Mosquito is perfect for this kind of mission. The bad news is that if anything goes wrong, you'll be hundreds of miles from help, flying over territory where every person on the ground is either your enemy or too terrified to help you. You spend the afternoon preparing your aircraft with obsessive attention to detail. Every rivet, every control surface, every instrument gets checked and double-checked. Your navigator plots the route on his charts, measuring distances and calculating fuel consumption with the precision of a mathematician. The armourer loads your 4 20mm cannons with high-explosive shells designed to punch through aircraft skin and explode inside fuel tanks. As evening approaches, you pull on your flying gear with the ritualistic care of a knight donning armor. The thick sheepskin-lined jacket weighs heavy on your shoulders, but you know you'll need every bit of insulation once you climb to altitude. The leather flying helmet fits snugly over your head with built-in earphones that connect you to your navigator and the outside world. Your oxygen mask hangs loose around your neck, ready to be strapped on when you climb above 10,000 feet. Walking out to your aircraft in the gathering dusk, you can feel the nervous energy crackling through the squadron. Ground crews make final adjustments to engines and weapons, while pilots and navigators conduct their own pre-flight inspections. The Mosquito looks different in the dim light, more sinister somehow, its camouflage paint scheme blending into the shadows. Climbing into the cockpit, you're struck by how cramped everything feels when you're wearing full flying gear. The thick jacket restricts your movement, and the parachute pack digs into your back. Your navigator settles in beside you, charts and instruments arranged within easy reach. Together, you run through the pre-flight checklist with methodical precision, each item checked and confirmed. Starting the engines in near darkness is a leap of faith. The Merlins cough and wheeze before catching with their familiar roar, flames shooting briefly from the exhaust stacks. The whole aircraft vibrates around you, and you can feel the power waiting to be unleashed. Engine temperatures climb slowly in the cold air, and you wait patiently for everything to reach operating limits. Takeoff is routine until you realize it isn't. Once you're airborne and climbing into the darkening sky, the reality of what you're about to do settles over you like a heavy blanket. You're flying toward German-occupied territory with the intention of attacking heavily defended targets. And your survival depends entirely on speed, stealth, and more luck than any rational person should expect to have. The flight across England passes quietly. Below you, the countryside is blacked out for the war, with only occasional flashes of light from trains or vehicles violating the blackout restrictions. Your navigator keeps track of your position using landmarks that are barely visible in the darkness, cross-referencing compass headings with the steady passage of time. As you approach the English Channel, you begin your descent toward the water. This is where things get interesting. For the next hour, you'll be flying at 50 feet above the waves, low enough that German radar stations won't detect you until you're practically on top of them. The theory is sound. The practice is terrifying. At 50 feet above the channel, flying at 200 miles per hour in darkness, every sense in your body is screaming danger. The water below looks solid black, and your altimeter becomes the most important instrument in the cockpit. Too high and you'll show up on enemy radar. Too low and you'll fly straight into a wave and disappear without a trace. The darkness plays tricks on your eyes. What looks like a clear horizon turns out to be a wall of cloud. What appears to be empty sky ahead might hide another aircraft on a collision course. Your navigator calls out course corrections through the intercom. His voice steady despite the circumstances, and you make small adjustments to heading while fighting the constant temptation to climb higher where things feel safer. The Mosquito handles the low-level flying with surprising grace. The wooden structure flexes slightly in the turbulent air near the water's surface, absorbing the worst of the bumps rather than fighting them. But the concentration required is exhausting. Every muscle in your body stays tense, ready to react instantly to any change in the aircraft's attitude or the rapidly changing conditions ahead. Your hands grip the control stick with enough force to leave permanent indentations in the leather grip. Sweat runs down your back despite the cold, and your breathing comes in short, shallow gasps that fog up the inside of your oxygen mask. The engine noise is constant and hypnotic, a steady roar that drowns out almost everything else. Halfway across the channel, your navigator taps your shoulder and points ahead. The French coast appears as a slightly darker line against the dark sky, barely visible but definitely there. This is the moment of truth. Once you cross that coastline, you're in enemy territory and everything changes. Crossing the coast now, your navigator's voice crackles through the intercom, and suddenly you're flying over German-occupied France. The landscape below is completely dark, but you know that hundreds of thousands of German soldiers are down there, along with radar stations, anti-aircraft guns, and fighter aircraft that would be very interested in shooting you down. The navigation from this point becomes a masterpiece of dead reckoning and visual recognition. Your navigator has memorized every significant landmark along the route: rivers, forests, towns, railroad lines, and he guides you through the darkness using features that are barely visible even with perfect night vision. "Left 5 degrees, he calls out. "Railway line should be coming up on the right." And there it is, a thin, dark line cutting through the countryside, exactly where it should be. You follow valleys and ridgelines when possible, staying low to avoid detection, but not so low that you risk flying into hills or trees. The Mosquito responds to every control input with precision, but the margin for error is essentially zero. At this altitude and speed, you have perhaps 2 seconds to react to any obstacle that appears ahead. The tension in the cockpit is thick enough to cut with a knife. Both you and your navigator are hyper-alert, scanning the darkness ahead for any sign of trouble. German night fighters are known to patrol these routes, and while the Mosquito is faster than most of them, getting jumped by a Messerschmitt 110 in the dark would be very bad news indeed. 20 minutes inland from the coast, your navigator announces that you're approaching the target area. The German airfield should be just ahead, hidden in the darkness, but definitely there according to the latest intelligence reports. You reduce power slightly and begin scanning the ground ahead for any signs of activity. And then you see it. The airfield appears ahead like a small city with scattered lights marking runways and buildings, but more importantly, you can see the dark shapes of aircraft parked in neat rows beside the main runway. Messerschmitt 109 fighters sitting on the ground like targets in a shooting gallery. This is the moment you've trained for, but actually seeing enemy aircraft on the ground triggers an adrenaline surge that makes your hands shake and your heart pound. These aren't training targets or photographs in a briefing room. These are real German fighters that have been shooting down your friends and colleagues, and now you have a chance to destroy them while they're helpless on the ground. You circle the airfield once to get oriented, staying far enough away to avoid detection. The layout matches the intelligence photographs perfectly. Runways, dispersal areas, hangars, and control tower all exactly where they should be. Your navigator counts aircraft and identifies the most profitable targets while you plan your attack run. The attack itself happens faster than you can fully process. You line up on the dispersal area, push the throttles to maximum power, and dive toward the parked aircraft at 300 miles per hour. The German aircraft grow larger in your windscreen with terrifying speed, and at 200 yards range, you press the firing button. The 4 20mm cannons open fire with a sound like the world ending. The whole Mosquito shudders and slows as if it's hit a wall, and bright tracer rounds streak toward the target aircraft. You see your shells impacting German fighters, sparks flying as metal tears through metal, and then the first aircraft explodes in a brilliant orange fireball that lights up the entire airfield. The attack run lasts perhaps 10 seconds, but it feels like hours. You see German personnel running in all directions, some firing small arms weapons in your general direction, others diving for cover behind buildings and equipment. More aircraft catch fire as your shells find fuel tanks and ammunition storage areas, and secondary explosions begin cooking off all around the airfield. You pull up sharply at the end of the attack run, your vision greying slightly from the G-forces as the Mosquito climbs away from the target. Behind you, the German airfield is a scene of controlled chaos, with burning aircraft lighting up the sky and alarm sirens wailing across the countryside. You've just successfully completed your first intruder mission, and the feeling is unlike anything you've ever experienced. But the job isn't finished yet. Now you have to get home, and that means flying 200 miles through increasingly alert German defences, while every radar operator and anti-aircraft gun crew in northern France knows that British aircraft are in the area. The flight home is a nightmare of searchlights and anti-aircraft fire. German radar stations have finally detected you, and searchlight beams sweep the sky trying to illuminate your aircraft. When they catch you in their beams, the glare is absolutely blinding, and you have to fly entirely by instruments while anti-aircraft shells burst around you. The flak is the worst part. You can see the muzzle flashes from the guns on the ground, followed a few seconds later by bursts of orange light and black smoke that mark where the shells explode. When they burst close enough, you can hear the explosions over the engine noise, and occasionally you feel the Mosquito shudder as shell fragments punch through the wooden wings. Your navigator calls out course changes to avoid the worst of the flak concentrations, but some of it is unavoidable. You weave and jink through the defensive fire, constantly changing altitude and direction to spoil the aim of the gun crews below. The Mosquito speed is your best defense. You're moving so fast that by the time the gunners spot you and train their weapons, you're already somewhere else. The French coast appears ahead like a promise of salvation, and you drop back down to wave-top height for the flight across the channel. Behind you, the sky over northern France is still lit up with searchlights and anti-aircraft fire as the Germans react to your attack. Other Mosquito crews are making their own attacks on different targets, and the whole area is in an uproar. The flight home across the channel is almost peaceful by comparison. The darkness that seemed so threatening on the way out now feels protective, hiding you from enemy eyes. Your navigator gives you a course for home, and you settle into the routine of long-distance flying, checking engine temperatures and fuel consumption while trying to process what you've just experienced. Landing back at your home base as the sun comes up feels surreal. Ground crews rush out to check your aircraft for damage, while you and your navigator climb stiffly out of the cockpit. Your legs are shaky from the adrenaline come down, and your hands won't stop trembling as you pull off your flying helmet. The debriefing session reveals that your attack was a complete success. Intelligence reports confirm that you destroyed at least 3 German fighters and damaged several others while suffering no casualties among the attacking force. It's the kind of result that makes senior officers very happy and ensures that you'll be doing this again very soon. But as you finally collapse into your bunk in the pre-dawn hours, exhaustion overwhelming the adrenaline, you realize that this was just the beginning. The war has years left to run, and every successful mission only means that you'll be sent on more dangerous ones. The survival statistics for intruder pilots are not encouraging, and you're going to be testing those odds over and over again. Your body finally relaxes into the thin mattress, muscles aching from hours of tension and concentration. Outside, you can hear other aircraft returning from missions, engines winding down as crews complete their own small victories against impossible odds. Tomorrow will bring new briefings, new targets, and new opportunities to test your luck against German defences. But for now, you're alive, your aircraft is intact, and somewhere in occupied France there are 3 fewer German fighters that will never threaten Allied bombers again. It's enough to let you sleep, at least until the next mission briefing. By early 1944, your night intruder missions have become routine, but now they're asking you to do something completely different. Instead of sneaking around in the dark, you're going to fly precision bombing missions in broad daylight. The target this time isn't a German airfield or supply depot. It's a prison in northern France where over 100 French resistance fighters are scheduled to be executed tomorrow morning. The briefing room feels different this time. The usual casual banter is replaced by an almost religious silence as Wing Commander Pickard spreads the photographs across the table. You've heard of Pickard, of course. Every Mosquito pilot has. He's the man they filmed for the propaganda movie Target for Tonight, and he's led more successful missions than anyone has a right to expect. If he's leading this operation, it means someone very important thinks it can actually work. Operation Jericho, Pickard announces, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. We're going to break open a prison. The aerial photographs show a rectangular building surrounded by high walls, sitting in the middle of farmland like a grey stone island. It looks impossibly small from the air, and you realise with growing dread that you're expected to hit specific sections of those walls with surgical precision. The plan is audacious beyond belief. 19 Mosquito fighter bombers will attack in 3 waves, with each wave targeting different parts of the prison structure. The first wave will blow holes in the outer walls. The second wave will destroy the guards' quarters. The third wave will attack the inner walls where the prisoners are held. The timing has to be perfect, the bombing absolutely precise, and all of this while German fighters scramble to intercept you. Your navigator bends over the maps with intense concentration, measuring distances and calculating approach angles. The prison sits beside a straight Roman road that runs for miles through the French countryside, providing a perfect lead-in for the bombing run. But it also means you'll be flying straight and level for several minutes while German anti-aircraft gunners have plenty of time to line up their shots. The weather briefing is both good news and bad news. Clear skies will give you perfect visibility for the precision bombing, but it also means German fighters will have no trouble finding you. The wind is light, which helps with bombing accuracy, but there's a front moving in from the Atlantic that could complicate the return flight. You spend the morning going over every detail of the mission until you could fly it in your sleep. The approach route, the bombing altitude, the escape path back to the channel. Your navigator has memorized every landmark between England and the target, and you've practiced the actual bombing run so many times that your hands move automatically through the sequence. The Mosquito feels heavier than usual as you taxi out for takeoff. Instead of the usual night intruder load of cannon ammunition, you're carrying two 500-pound delayed action bombs in the internal bomb bay. The bombs are fitted with 11-second delay fuses, just enough time for you to get clear before they explode, in theory. Formation takeoff with 18 other Mosquitoes is controlled chaos. Aircraft spread across the airfield, engines warming up in sequence, and then the gradual parade of departures as each crew gets clearance from the control tower. You fall into position behind Pickard's aircraft, close enough to see him and his navigator silhouetted in their cockpit, far enough away to avoid a collision if someone makes a mistake. The flight across the channel is routine until it isn't. Flying in broad daylight, you can see for miles in every direction, but that also means German radar stations are tracking your formation from the moment you leave the English coast. Radio chatter on the German frequencies indicates that fighters are already scrambling to intercept you, and suddenly this precision bombing mission has turned into a race against time. Your navigator keeps up a steady stream of navigation updates as the French coastline grows larger ahead. The Mosquito formation maintains perfect discipline, each aircraft holding its assigned position, while 19 separate crews run through their own mental preparations for what's coming next. You check your oxygen mask connection, adjust your seat harness, and run through the bombing sequence one more time. Crossing into French airspace, the landscape below is winter-brown fields and bare trees dotted with small villages that look peaceful from 5,000 feet. But you know that German observers are already telephoning reports of your formation to fighter control centers, and somewhere ahead German Focke-Wulf 190s are climbing to intercept altitude. The Roman road appears exactly where it should be, a straight line cutting through the countryside like a navigator's dream. Pickard leads the formation into line astern formation, and suddenly you're following a trail of Mosquitoes toward a target that's still invisible ahead. Your pulse quickens as you realize this is really happening. You're about to attempt precision bombing of a building that's surrounded by friendly prisoners. The prison materializes ahead like something from a nightmare. Grey stone walls surrounding rectangular buildings with guard towers at each corner and what looks like a church parade ground in the center courtyard. Through your windscreen, you can actually see people moving around inside the walls. Tiny figures that represent both the guards you're trying to neutralize and the prisoners you're trying to save. Pickard's first wave drops toward the target at what seems like suicidal speed. You watch their bombs fall away from the aircraft and streak toward the outer wall of the prison. The bombs disappear into the structure, and for 11 seconds, nothing happens. Then the entire northeastern wall erupts in a column of smoke and debris that rises hundreds of feet into the air. Your turn. The second wave, your wave, is supposed to hit the guards' quarters and administration buildings. You drop the nose of the Mosquito and dive toward the target at 300 miles per hour, the prison growing larger in your windscreen with terrifying speed. Your navigator calls out distance and altitude while you line up on the buildings that intelligence says house the German guards. At 1,000 feet altitude, you press the bomb release button. Two 500-pound bombs drop away from your aircraft, and you immediately pull up in a climbing turn to escape the blast. Behind you, 11 seconds later, the guards' quarters disappear in another massive explosion that shakes your aircraft even at a safe distance. But something's wrong. Through the smoke and debris, you can see that the third wave of Mosquitoes is having trouble identifying their targets. The explosions from the first two waves have filled the air with smoke and dust, and the precise bombing that this mission requires has become nearly impossible. You watch in horror as some of the third wave Mosquitoes, confused by the smoke, bomb what they think is part of the prison, but which turns out to be a nearby school. The building erupts in flames, and you realize that dozens of French children have just been killed in a mission designed to save French resistance fighters. The moral complexity of what you've just participated in hits you like a physical blow. War isn't just about shooting down enemy fighters or destroying military targets. Sometimes it's about making impossible choices between bad outcomes and worse ones, and living with the consequences afterward. German fighters finally arrive just as the bombing ends. Focke-Wulf 190s diving out of the sun, their cannons already firing as they close on the scattered Mosquito formation. The air around you fills with tracer rounds and the bright flashes of cannon shells exploding. Your first instinct is to run. The Mosquito is faster than the German fighters, and in a straight chase you can outrun them back to the channel. But Picard's aircraft has been hit, black smoke trailing from one engine, and he's falling behind the formation. The Focke-Wulfs close in for the kill like sharks scenting blood. You make a decision that surprises even yourself. Instead of running for home, you turn back toward the German fighters. Your 4 20mm cannons are still loaded with armor-piercing ammunition, and while you're not a fighter pilot in the traditional sense, you know how to shoot. The engagement lasts perhaps 30 seconds, but it feels like hours. German fighters and British Mosquitoes swirling around each other in a deadly ballet, cannon fire lacing the air between them. You get your sights on a Focke-Wulf 190 for just a moment and fire a burst that sends pieces flying off its wing, but there's no time to see if you've caused serious damage. Picard's Mosquito is definitely in trouble. The smoke trail is getting thicker and his aircraft is losing altitude despite his attempts to maintain formation speed. You can see him and his navigator in their cockpit fighting to keep their damaged aircraft in the air long enough to reach the channel. The chase continues across the French countryside at treetop level. German fighters attack in pairs, diving from above and pulling up just before they hit the ground. Your navigator calls out threats and escape routes while you throw the Mosquito into violent evasive maneuvers that test the structural limits of the wooden airframe. The French coast appears ahead, but Picard's aircraft is getting lower and slower. The damaged engine finally quits completely, windmilling uselessly as he struggles to maintain flying speed on one engine. You can see that he's not going to make it to the channel, let alone all the way back to England. Picard's Mosquito disappears behind a line of trees, and you know without being told that he's gone. The man who led the most daring precision bombing mission of the war has been killed just minutes after its successful completion. The victory and the loss are inseparable, two sides of the same coin that defines combat flying in World War II. The flight home is subdued despite the mission's success. Radio reports confirm that the prison walls were breached and that over 250 prisoners escaped, including many of the resistance fighters who were scheduled for execution. But the cost includes Picard and his navigator, plus the French civilians killed when bombs hit the school by mistake. Landing back at your base, you sit in the cockpit for several minutes after shutting down the engines. Your hands are shaking again, but this time it's not just from adrenaline. The precision required for daylight bombing is far more demanding than night intruder work, and the moral complexity of the missions is something no amount of training can prepare you for. The debriefing session is thorough but subdued. Intelligence officers want to know exactly which buildings were hit, how many bombs found their targets, what the German fighter response was like. But everyone in the room knows that the most important question can't be answered by any debriefing. Was it worth it? Did the lives saved justify the lives lost? That evening, you write a letter home that you'll never send. How do you explain to your family what it feels like to drop bombs on a building that contains both enemies and friends? How do you describe the split-second decisions that determine who lives and who dies? How do you find the words for experiences that exist outside normal human comprehension? Your navigator finds you in the mess hall, staring at a cup of tea that's gone cold while you wrestle with thoughts that have no easy answers. He doesn't say anything, just sits down across from you and lights a cigarette. After a while, he mentions that there's another mission briefing scheduled for tomorrow morning, a German rocket site in northern France that needs to be destroyed before it can launch flying bombs at London. You nod and finish your cold tea. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new moral complexities, new opportunities to test your skills against German defences. The war continues regardless of your personal struggles with its demands, and your job is to fly the missions they give you as well as you possibly can. But tonight, lying in your narrow bunk, listening to the wind rattle the windows of the barracks, you think about Picard and his navigator, about French school children who died because of targeting mistakes, about resistance fighters who lived because 19 Mosquito crews were willing to attempt the impossible. The mathematics of war are never simple. For every life saved, another is lost. For every successful mission, there's a price that someone has to pay. Your job is to fly the aircraft, drop the bombs where you're told, and try not to think too hard about the larger questions that have no clear answers. Sleep comes eventually, but it's filled with dreams of precision bombing runs and burning buildings, of German fighters diving out of the sun and friends who don't make it home. You wake up several times during the night, heart pounding from nightmares that are really just memories in disguise. When morning comes, you'll put on your flying gear and climb into another Mosquito for another impossible mission, because that's what fighter pilots do in World War II. They fly the missions, face the dangers, and try to make the right decisions when there are no good choices available. Your body settles deeper into the thin mattress as exhaustion finally overcomes the mental replay of the day's events. Outside, you can hear the distant sound of aircraft engines as other crews prepare for night missions, the eternal cycle of operations that defines life in an RAF squadron. Tomorrow will be different, but it will also be the same. Different targets, different weather, different challenges, but the same requirement for precision flying, split-second decision-making, and the kind of courage that can only be measured after the fact. June 1944 brings a new kind of terror to your war. A week after D-Day, as Allied forces struggle to establish their foothold in Normandy, Hitler unleashes his revenge weapons on London. You first see a V-1 flying bomb on a clear summer evening, a small cross-shaped object streaking across the sky with a 20-foot flame shooting from its tail. The sound it makes is unlike anything you've ever heard, a harsh, pulsing roar that echoes across the countryside like a giant's chainsaw. The briefing officer's voice is grim as he explains your new mission. The Germans are launching these things from sites all along the French coast. They're targeting London and they're fast. 400 miles per hour, maybe more. Your job is to shoot them down before they reach the city. You study the intelligence photographs with growing unease. The V-1 is essentially a small aircraft packed with explosives, guided by a simple autopilot system that flies it in a straight line until the fuel runs out. When the engine stops, the bomb dives toward whatever happens to be underneath it. Sometimes that's an open field, sometimes it's a street full of civilians. The technical challenge is staggering. The V-1 flies at nearly 400 miles per hour, which means your Mosquito has to be flying at maximum speed just to catch up with one. Once you do catch up, you have to shoot it down without getting caught in the explosion when a ton of high explosives detonates 50 yards from your aircraft. Your first V-1 interception attempt teaches you just how difficult this new mission is going to be. You're patrolling at 10,000 feet over the Kent countryside when radar control vectors you toward an incoming target. Bogey bearing 090, distance 20 miles, low level, high speed. You turn toward the intercept heading and push the throttles to maximum power. The Mosquito accelerates smoothly, but even at full power you're barely gaining on the target. Through your windscreen you can see the distinctive flicker of the V-1's pulse jet engine, a bright dot of flame racing across the landscape below. The interception geometry is critical. You can't attack from directly behind because the V1 is too fast. You can't attack from the side because the overtaking speed would be too high for accurate shooting. The only option is to dive from above, using gravity to help you catch up and try to get your guns on target during the brief moment when your flight paths converge. You roll into a steep dive, the Mosquito screaming down toward the V1 at close to 450 miles per hour. The wooden airframe shudders and groans under the stress, and you can feel the control stick getting heavier as the speed builds. Your navigator calls out the closing distance while you fight to line up your gun sight on the small, fast-moving target. At 300 yards range, you open fire with all 4 cannons. The recoil slows the Mosquito dramatically, and bright tracer rounds streak toward the V1. You see strikes on the target, sparks flying from its metal skin, but the flying bomb continues on its course, apparently undamaged. You're closing too fast. The V1 fills your windscreen, growing larger with terrifying speed, and suddenly you realize you're about to collide with it. You pull back hard on the control stick, the Mosquito climbing sharply away from the target, G-forces pressing you down into your seat until your vision starts to grey at the edges. The V1 explodes beneath you with a brilliant white flash that temporarily blinds you. The blast wave hits your aircraft like a giant fist, throwing the Mosquito sideways and upward in a violent motion that tests every rivet and joint in the wooden structure. For a moment you think the airplane is going to come apart around you, but somehow it holds together. When your vision clears, you're flying through a cloud of debris and smoke. Small pieces of metal patter against the windscreen and wings like deadly hail, and there's a strong smell of explosives in the cockpit despite your oxygen mask. You check the engine instruments frantically, looking for signs of damage, but miraculously everything appears normal. The V1 threat changes everything about flying in 1944. These weapons are being launched around the clock, day and night, in weather that would ground normal aircraft. Your squadron is taken off intruder duties and assigned to full-time V1 interception, patrolling the skies over southern England in 8-hour shifts that push both aircraft and crew to their absolute limits. The physical demands of V1 interception are unlike anything you've experienced before. Chasing these high-speed targets requires flying the Mosquito at maximum power for extended periods, and the constant high-speed maneuvering is exhausting. After 4 hours of interception patrols, your arms ache from fighting the heavy control forces, and your body is soaked with sweat despite the cold air at altitude. The mental stress is even worse. Knowing that each V1 you fail to intercept will explode somewhere in London creates a pressure that's different from normal combat operations. When you're attacking a German airfield, failure means you don't destroy enemy aircraft. When you're intercepting V1s, failure means that families in London die in their homes. You develop new techniques for destroying the flying bombs. Head-on attacks are too dangerous because of the closing speed, but you discover that you can tip them over by flying alongside and using your wingtip to upset their control surfaces. It's incredibly dangerous flying that requires positioning your aircraft within inches of an explosive device traveling at 400 miles per hour, but sometimes it works. The successful tip-over maneuver is a thing of beauty when it works properly. You approach the V1 from slightly above and behind, matching its speed exactly, then ease your wingtip under its wingtip. A gentle nudge is enough to upset the simple gyroscopic guidance system, sending the flying bomb into a spiral that ends with it crashing into an empty field instead of reaching its target. But more often, you have to destroy them with gunfire, and that means flying directly into the explosion. You learn to time your attacks so that the V1 explodes while you're pulling up and away, using every bit of the Mosquito's performance to get clear of the blast. Even so, your aircraft accumulates damage from debris and blast effects, with fabric patches and metal plates covering holes punched by flying fragments. The summer of 1944 becomes a blur of high-speed chases across the English countryside. You patrol the same routes day after day, vectored by ground control toward incoming V1s with monotonous regularity. Some days you shoot down 3 or 4, other days the flying bombs sneak through undetected and you hear about the explosions on the BBC Evening News. Your navigator keeps careful records of your interceptions, plotting each successful engagement on a map of southern England. The pattern that emerges shows the deadly efficiency of the German V1 campaign. Most of the flying bombs are aimed directly at central London, following flight paths that take them over the most densely populated areas of the city. The autumn weather makes V1 interception even more challenging. Low clouds and poor visibility hide the flying bombs until they're almost impossible to intercept, and the shorter days mean that most of your patrols are flown in darkness. Night interception of V1s is a nightmare of radar vectors and split-second reactions, with the additional hazard of collision with other British aircraft. Your most successful V1 engagement comes on a clear October morning when radar control vectors you toward a formation of 3 flying bombs approaching the Kent coast. Multiple targets mean multiple opportunities, but also multiple chances for things to go wrong. You approach the first V1 from a high-side attack, diving down from 12,000 feet to intercept altitude. The gunfire that destroys it also puts you directly in the path of the second V1, forcing you into violent evasive maneuvers that leave you disoriented and struggling to regain control. Your navigator talks you back onto the second target, his calm voice cutting through the chaos of high-speed flight. Target bearing 270, 2 miles, same altitude. You roll out on the intercept heading just as the second V1 passes directly in front of you, close enough to see the crude welding marks on its metal skin. The deflection shot that destroys the second V1 is pure instinct rather than calculated gunnery. You fire a brief burst just ahead of the target's nose, and the flying bomb flies directly into the stream of cannon shells. The explosion is so close that you can feel the heat through the cockpit canopy, and the blast wave flips your aircraft onto its back before you can react. Recovering from the inverted position takes precious seconds, and when you finally roll upright, the third V1 is nowhere to be seen. Your navigator picks it up on his charts, tracking its progress toward London while you struggle to catch up. The chase becomes a desperate race across the southern suburbs, with the V1 maintaining its lead despite your best efforts. You finally catch the third flying bomb over the outskirts of London, but by then it's too close to the city for safe interception. The explosion, when you finally destroy it, shatters windows for miles around and adds another crater to the London landscape. It's a successful interception by the technical definition, but seeing the destruction below makes it feel more like a failure. The psychological toll of V1 interception becomes apparent as the summer turns to autumn. Pilots who seemed unshakable during night intruder operations begin showing signs of stress and fatigue. The constant pressure of high-speed interception, combined with the knowledge that civilian lives depend on your success, creates a mental burden that's different from normal combat operations. Sleep becomes elusive despite your exhaustion. You lie in your bunk, replaying interception attempts, analysing what went right and what went wrong, calculating how many V1s might have gotten through while you were attacking others. The sound of the pulse jet engines invades your dreams, that harsh mechanical roar that signals another flying bomb heading for London. Your aircraft maintenance crew works around the clock to keep the Mosquitoes operational, despite the constant damage from blast effects and debris. Every aircraft in the squadron shows signs of V1 encounters: patched holes, replaced panels, new pieces of equipment to replace items destroyed by explosion fragments. The wooden structure that makes the Mosquito so effective also makes it vulnerable to the kind of damage that flying through explosions inevitably causes. The winter of 1944 brings new challenges as the Germans modify their V-1 tactics. Some flying bombs are launched at night, their flame trails barely visible against the dark sky. Others fly at different altitudes, forcing you to patrol at multiple levels simultaneously. A few are fitted with crude evasive maneuvers that make them harder to intercept. Your 100th V1 interception comes on a cold December morning, a routine engagement that feels exactly like your first one 6 months earlier. The flying bomb appears on radar, you're vectored to the intercept, and you shoot it down with a textbook attack from the high quarter. But instead of satisfaction, you feel only exhaustion and the knowledge that there will be 101st and 102nd and as many more as it takes until the war finally ends. The statistics tell the story of your squadron's success. Over 6 months of V1 operations, your unit has destroyed nearly 200 flying bombs, each one representing dozens of London civilians who didn't die in their homes. But the cost in aircraft and crew has been substantial, with the constant high-speed flying and explosion damage taking its toll on both men and machines. By early 1945, the V-1 threat is diminishing as Allied ground forces overrun the German launch sites in France and Belgium. Your squadron is gradually transferred back to intruder operations, attacking the remaining German airfields and supply lines as the Wehrmacht retreats toward the homeland. But the transition back to normal combat operations feels strange after months of V-1 interception. Flying at normal speed seems almost leisurely after spending so long at maximum power, and attacking stationary targets on the ground lacks the immediate urgency of chasing flying bombs across the English countryside. The V-1 campaign taught you lessons about flying that no peacetime pilot could ever learn. You've pushed the Mosquito to its absolute performance limits and beyond, discovering capabilities that even the designers didn't know existed. You've flown through explosions that should have destroyed your aircraft and survived high-speed encounters that left other pilots as smoking craters in the countryside. More importantly, you've learned about the relationship between technical skill and moral responsibility. Every successful V-1 interception represented not just flying ability, but the lives of people you would never meet, families who went to sleep safely because you managed to shoot down a flying bomb before it reached their neighborhood. As 1945 begins, you're flying different missions against different targets, but the lessons learned during the V-1 campaign remain. The precision flying, the split-second decision-making, the ability to operate effectively under extreme stress, all skills that were developed during those desperate summer months when German revenge weapons threatened to turn London into rubble. Your body has adapted to the demands of high-performance flying in ways that will probably never completely reverse. Your reflexes are faster, your situational awareness sharper, your tolerance for G-forces higher than any civilian pilot could achieve. But you've also aged years in months, with lines around your eyes and a slight tremor in your hands that appears whenever you're very tired. The war is winding down, but for now you continue flying the missions they assign you, knowing that each successful sortie brings the end a little bit closer. German resistance is weakening, their aircraft are running out of fuel, and their pilots are increasingly inexperienced boys who pose little threat to veteran crews like yours. But you also know that the war isn't over yet, and that complacency in combat flying is usually fatal. So you continue to approach each mission with the same careful preparation and professional execution that kept you alive through the darkest days of the V-1 campaign. Spring 1945 feels different from all the springs that came before it. The war is clearly ending, and even the most pessimistic intelligence reports suggest that German resistance is collapsing. Your missions now take you deep into Germany itself, attacking airfields where fuel shortages have grounded most of the remaining Luftwaffe fighters. The landscape below shows the devastation of total war. Bombed cities, abandoned vehicles, refugees streaming along destroyed roads. Your final combat mission comes on a warm April morning, 3 weeks before the war officially ends. The target is a small airfield near Munich, where intelligence reports suggest a few German jets might still be operational. You approach the target area through scattered clouds, your navigator calling out landmarks in countryside that looks peaceful despite the massive upheaval happening across Europe. The German airfield appears ahead, but it's clearly abandoned. No aircraft visible on the runways, no signs of activity around the buildings, no anti-aircraft fire rising to meet you. You circle the field once out of habit, looking for targets that aren't there, then turn for home without dropping a single bomb. It feels anticlimactic after years of dangerous missions, but perhaps that's appropriate. Wars don't end with dramatic final battles. They just fade away when one side runs out of the will to continue fighting. The flight home takes you over Bavaria and Austria, regions that were once the heart of the German war machine, but now show only destruction and abandonment. Cities reduced to rubble, factories standing empty, transportation networks completely severed. From your cockpit at 10,000 feet, you can see the scope of the devastation that total war has brought to Central Europe. But you also notice something else during that final mission. The constant tension that has been your companion for 3 years is finally beginning to ease. Your shoulders aren't permanently hunched against expected attack. Your eyes aren't constantly scanning the sky for enemy fighters. For the first time since 1942, flying feels more like flying and less like barely controlled violence. VE Day arrives on May 8, 1945, and you're sitting in the squadron dispersal hut when the official announcement comes over the radio. The war in Europe is officially over. The words hang in the air for a moment, and then someone starts laughing. Not with humour, but with the kind of exhausted relief that comes when an impossible burden is finally lifted. The celebration that night is subdued despite the magnitude of what you've all accomplished. Too many empty chairs in the mess hall, too many names on the memorial board, too many friends who didn't live to see this day. You raise a glass of warm beer to absent friends, and the toast echoes around the room with a mixture of triumph and melancholy that captures the complex emotions of survival. That night, lying in your bunk for what you know will be one of the last times, you try to process what you've experienced over the past 3 years. Hundreds of combat missions, dozens of enemy aircraft destroyed, thousands of miles flown over hostile territory. The numbers seem abstract, but the memories are vivid. The smell of cordite and aviation fuel, the feeling of G-forces during violent evasive maneuvers, the sight of tracer rounds streaking past your windscreen. You've learned things about yourself that no peacetime experience could have taught you. You know exactly how you react under extreme stress, how much fear you can tolerate before it becomes paralyzing, how to make life or death decisions in fractions of seconds. You've discovered physical capabilities you didn't know you possessed and mental resilience that surprises even you. But you've also paid a price that will take years to fully understand. Your hearing is permanently damaged from years of engine noise. Your night vision has been affected by countless hours of flying in darkness. Your hands sometimes shake when you're very tired, a reminder of the constant stress your nervous system has endured. The transition to civilian life begins almost immediately. Within weeks of VE Day, the squadron is disbanded and the aircraft are flown to storage facilities where they'll be dismantled or sold as surplus. The Mosquito that carried you through dozens of combat missions is reduced to a serial number on a disposal list, its wooden structure destined for scrap or perhaps conversion to civilian use. Saying goodbye to your navigator is surprisingly difficult. You've shared experiences that can't be explained to people who weren't there and developed a working relationship based on absolute trust under the most dangerous circumstances imaginable. You exchange addresses and promises to stay in touch, but you both know that civilian life will probably take you in different directions. The demobilization process is efficient but impersonal. Medical examinations, paperwork, interviews with officers who want to know your post-war plans. The Royal Air Force has invested considerable time and money in your training, and they're curious about whether you'll consider staying in the service. But the prospect of peacetime flying seems impossibly mundane after years of combat operations. You return to civilian life with skills that have no obvious peacetime application. You can navigate by dead reckoning across hundreds of miles of hostile territory, but struggle to find your way around a city that's changed while you were away. You can make split-second decisions under extreme stress, but find yourself paralyzed by simple choices like what to order for dinner. Sleep remains difficult long after the war ends. Your body has been conditioned to wake at the slightest unusual sound, and the hypervigilance that kept you alive in combat doesn't simply switch off when the fighting stops. You find yourself automatically scanning the sky whenever you hear aircraft engines, and loud noises trigger reflexive defensive reactions that embarrass you in social situations. Employment proves challenging despite your technical qualifications. Few civilian employers understand what military pilots actually do, and even fewer have jobs that match your experience level. You eventually find work with a small airline, flying converted military transports on domestic routes that seem almost laughably safe compared to wartime operations. The civilian flying is monotonous but somehow comforting, following published airways, communicating with air traffic control, landing at proper airports with concrete runways and approach lighting systems. No one shoots at you, no enemy fighters appear suddenly out of cloud formations, no searchlights sweep the sky looking for your aircraft. But you miss the Mosquito. Commercial aircraft are safer and more comfortable, but they lack the responsive handling and raw performance that made the Mosquito such a joy to fly. The wooden fighter bomber was an extension of your will, responding to the slightest control input with precision and grace. Civilian aircraft feel heavy and sluggish by comparison. Years pass and gradually you adapt to peacetime life. You marry, start a family, buy a house in a suburb that's being built where RAF training airfields used to operate. Your children grow up hearing occasional stories about the war, but they can't really understand what it was like to fly combat missions in wooden airplanes against an enemy that controlled most of Europe. Occasionally, you encounter other Mosquito veterans at aviation gatherings or military reunions. There's an immediate recognition between you, a shared understanding that doesn't require words. You can identify other combat pilots by the way they automatically check the weather before making any plans, by their unconscious habit of noting the location of emergency exits, by the particular way they listen to aircraft engines. The nightmares gradually fade, but they never completely disappear. Even decades later, you sometimes wake up thinking you're back in the cockpit of a Mosquito, diving toward a German airfield while flak bursts around you. The dreams are vivid enough that you can smell the leather of your flying helmet and feel the vibration of the Merlin engines through the control stick. As you grow older, you become more aware of how few Mosquito crews actually survived the war. The statistics that seemed abstract during combat become personal as you realize how many of your contemporaries didn't live to see peacetime. You're part of a shrinking group of men who experienced something that can't be replicated or fully explained to people who weren't there. Museums occasionally contact you for interviews about your wartime experiences. You try to answer their questions honestly, but find it difficult to convey the reality of combat flying to people who've never experienced it. How do you explain the peculiar combination of terror and exhilaration that characterized every mission? How do you describe the absolute trust required between pilot and navigator when death was always just one mistake away? The Mosquito itself becomes a legend, remembered as one of the most successful aircraft of World War II. Aviation historians write books about its technical innovations and operational achievements, but you remember it more simply as an airplane that brought you home when other aircraft might not have. Its speed saved your life more times than you can count, and its wooden construction proved remarkably resilient under conditions that would have destroyed conventional metal aircraft. Sometimes you visit aviation museums that have preserved Mosquitoes, and seeing those familiar lines brings back memories with startling clarity. You can almost feel the controls stick in your hands and hear the distinctive sound of the Merlin engines spinning up for takeoff. The aircraft looks smaller than you remember, and you wonder how you and your navigator fit into that cramped cockpit for missions that lasted 8 hours or more. Younger visitors to the museums ask questions about what it was really like to fly these aircraft in combat. You try to give honest answers, but you're also aware that your memories have been filtered through decades of peacetime life. The sharp edges of fear and exhaustion have been smoothed over by time, leaving mostly the pride of having served and the satisfaction of having survived. The last flying Mosquito is finally retired in the 1960s, ending an operational career that spanned more than 2 decades. You watch the final flight on television, and when the wooden fighter bomber lands for the last time, you feel a sense of loss that's difficult to explain to family members who don't understand your attachment to a machine. Your grandchildren grow up in a world where the Second World War is ancient history, something they study in school but can't really imagine. They know their grandfather was a pilot during the war, but to them it's just another fact about the distant past. They can't conceive of a time when German bombers attacked London every night, or when young men climbed into wooden airplanes to attack heavily defended targets with no guarantee they'd ever come home. As you enter your final years, you find yourself thinking more often about the friends who didn't survive the war. Their faces remain young in your memory while you've grown old, and sometimes you wonder what they might have accomplished if they'd lived to see peacetime. The debt you owe to their sacrifice is something you've carried for decades, and it influences every major decision you make in civilian life. The physical effects of wartime flying become more noticeable as you age. Your damaged hearing requires hearing aids, and your night vision is poor enough that you stop driving after dark, but your hands remain steady, and when you demonstrate aircraft controls to curious museum visitors, the muscle memory of decades-old training returns with surprising clarity. Your children and grandchildren eventually understand that your wartime experiences shaped everything about your post-war life. Your insistence on mechanical reliability, your habit of maintaining emergency supplies, your reluctance to waste food or fuel, all traces of lessons learned when shortage and mechanical failure meant the difference between life and death. The stories you tell become family legend, passed down to grandchildren who repeat them to their own children. But you know that something essential is lost in each retelling, that the reality of combat flying can't be captured in words. The fear, the cold, the exhaustion, the split-second decisions, the absolute dependence on machinery and teamwork, these things can only be truly understood by people who experience them firsthand. Late at night, when sleep doesn't come easily, you sometimes find yourself mentally flying old missions. The routes are still clear in your memory. The channel crossing at 50 feet, the navigation landmarks that guided you through hostile territory, the final approach to targets that were heavily defended by people who wanted to kill you. But mostly, you remember the good parts, the satisfaction of a mission completed successfully, the relief of landing safely after a difficult operation, the camaraderie of crews who trusted each other with their lives. The Mosquito was a remarkable aircraft, flown by remarkable people during a time when the world's future hung in the balance. As you finally drift towards sleep, your body settling into the comfortable mattress that bears no resemblance to those thin wartime bunks, you're grateful for the life you've been able to live. The war took 3 years of your youth, but it gave you experiences and friendships that defined everything that came afterward. The young man who climbed into a wooden fighter bomber in 1942 could never have imagined the world that emerged from that conflict, but he did his part to shape that world, flying dangerous missions with skill and courage when it mattered most. The aircraft are gone now. The squadrons disbanded, the airfields converted to other purposes, but the memory of what was accomplished in those desperate years remains, carried forward by the few who were there and lived to tell about it. Your breathing slows as sleep finally comes, and in your dreams you're young again, flying a Mosquito through clean air toward a horizon full of possibilities. The engines run smoothly, the wooden wings flex gently in the turbulence, and ahead lies another day when courage and skill might make all the difference in the world. So next time you can't sleep because your neighbour's too loud, remember the fighter pilots who flew wooden airplanes into the heart of enemy territory, guided only by skill, courage, and the hope that their sacrifices might help build a better world. They found peace in the most dangerous circumstances imaginable, and their example reminds us that rest is something to be grateful for, not taken for granted.